So how do we show an error message here? Of course, it's important to keep in mind that this message will only be shown if we make it into this if statement, which will only be the case if at least one of these conditions here is met. Now, to show this error message, we can use another built-in function provided by Flutter, and this time it will be the show dialog function, which will show some info or error dialog on the screen, some pop-up on the screen, you could say. Show dialog, just like show date picker or show modal bottom sheet before, wants a context value, which we set to this context object that's available in this state class. And it wants such a builder function, which should be a function that takes some context as an input and returns a widget as a value. And that widget will simply be the content of that pop-up dialog that will be shown. So here we get this context provided by Flutter automatically when it executes this builder method. And the widget I want to return here will be one of the built-in dialog widgets. Now, there are a couple of built-in dialog widgets, and I'm interested in the alert dialog, which is a dialog styled and optimized for showing some alert message. The alert dialog widget then has a couple of parameters that can be set. For example, a title parameter, which wants another widget, where I'll use the text widget to give this pop-up window a title. For example, invalid input. And this can be converted to a constant text. I'll not convert the overall alert dialog because this would soon not be possible anyways. Because the title is not all that's added here, instead I also will add some content, which is the main text, the main content shown in the dialog. And here I'll create another text widget, though you could also use other widgets in here, don't get me wrong. But here I'll use some simple text and, for example, say, please make sure a valid title, amount, date, and category was entered. And now last but not least, we can also set the actions parameter along with many other parameters, as you can see, of course. But here it's the actions parameter which I want to set, which allows you to define a bunch of actions, typically buttons that should be displayed in that dialog, which, for example, allow the user to close the dialog, so to close this pop-up window. And here I'll add a simple text button as an action, where onPressed, of course, must be set to an anonymous function here, where I then actually want to close this dialog by again using navigator pop, as we did it before for the modal bottom sheet. And the pop method wants the context, in this case the context connected to this dialog, so this ctx value, which is passed into this function here automatically by Flutter. And besides setting onPressed, I of course also set my child here, the main content of this button. And here I'll set this to a text widget where I simply say, OK, and turn this into a constant text. And with that, we're showing this error dialog. Now, as a last step, I just also want to return after showing this dialog, because as mentioned before, whenever you return in a function, you make sure that no code thereafter in that function gets executed. So here I'm returning after calling show dialog, but still inside of this if statement, so that any code I add thereafter won't be executed if we made it into this if statement. Because if we make it in there, I just want to show this dialog and then do nothing else. I don't want to continue because soon, when we continue, we will use the entered data and create a new expense. And that, of course, should not happen if invalid data has been entered. So with all that out of the way, if we save this and force a reload, if I open this and I enter nothing, I get this error dialog, which I can close, of course, but I get it whenever I try to submit invalid data. And that therefore, of course, works exactly as it should. Now, as a next step, we can make sure that if valid data was entered, we use that data to update this list. And this is actually something which you can try on your own, because this is actually something which we basically already did in this course. Of course, not in this exact app, but the pattern, the approach you need here is one we already used before. But of course, in the next lecture, we'll also implement it together.